Hey, everybody, and welcome to another deep dive with us. This time we're going to be looking at Leviticus, chapters 21 through 23.
Oh, yeah, some really interesting stuff in those chapters.
I know, right? When I first saw it, I thought Leviticus.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
But then I started reading and...
Yeah, you can find some really amazing stuff when you dig a little deeper into Leviticus.
Exactly. It's not just a bunch of rules and regulations. There's actually a lot of really relevant wisdom in there.
Yeah.
Stuff that we can apply to our lives even today.
It's almost like a blueprint for a good life.
Okay, so to start off, these chapters are all about instructions for priests, guidelines for staying holy, and then there's a whole section on feasts.
Right.
So
Lots to cover.
how does any of that connect to me in the year 2024?
Well, think about it this way. Imagine these chapters as like a guide for how to live a life that's aligned with, your values, things that you hold sacred.
Okay.
It's not about the rituals themselves, but it's about those underlying principles, like purity, offering your best, and celebrating the things that really matter. Okay, I like where this is going.
Those are the things that they're timeless. you
Yeah.
know, And I think they can resonate with anyone who's looking for a deeper connection with something bigger than themselves.
All right, let's dive into this. Leviticus chapter 21 kicks off with all these guidelines for priests, things like not touching dead bodies, and certain rules about marriage, like why so many restrictions?
Well, imagine you're a priest and you're this living bridge between like the everyday world and the divine.
Okay, so they were representing God.
Yeah, like an embodiment of God's presence. And every action, every choice had to reflect that.
That makes sense.
And that's where the concept of holiness comes in.
Okay, so they're like walking, talking representations of God, and their lives had to reflect that.
Exactly. Now, we might not be priests in that literal sense, but I think that principle of living a set-apart life, it still applies.
When you say set apart, what does that even look like in 2024? Should I become a hermit or something?
No, not quite. Think of it more as being intentional about what you allow into your life.
Like what you mean?
What influences you? What are you putting into your mind, into your spirit?
Okay, so guarding my heart.
Yeah. Not in a literal sense, but
Yeah.
in terms of what you're letting shape you.
So being more intentional about the things I'm choosing.
Exactly. The thoughts, the ideas, the influences.
Okay, I'm starting to get it.
It's about making conscious choices that align with, what you value the most.
So it's less about physical separation
Yeah.
and more about filtering all the noise.
Yeah. Filtering the noise.
Yeah.
And focusing on what truly matters.
That's a helpful way to look at it.
Think about it like this.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to grow a beautiful garden, you can't just let any plant grow.
Right.
You'd pick the best soil, the right seeds, and you would take good care of them. It's kind of the same with our lives.
Yeah.
We need to be mindful of what we're cultivating within ourselves.
That's a great analogy. So it applies to everything, like the shows I watch,
Yeah.
the music I listen to, even the people I spend my time with.
Exactly. It's about those inputs, the things that are shaping your life.
Okay, let's move on to Leviticus 22 then. Now, this chapter seems to double down on this whole honoring God thing, especially when it comes to offerings and sacrifices.
Right.
So what's going on there?
It's about offering your best. It wasn't just about going through the motions. It was about putting your heart into it, like showing your devotion and your reverence.
Interesting.
Even the animals that they brought for sacrifice, they had to be without blemish.
Yeah,
The best of the flock.
it's like they were saying, this is the best that I have, and I'm bringing it to you because you're worthy of it. So it's not just about checking off a box, but it's about the heart behind it, the intentionality.
Absolutely. And that brings up a good question for us today. What are we offering to what we hold sacred?
Ooh, that's deep.
Are we giving our leftovers? Or are we giving the first fruits of our time, our talents, our focus to the things that really matter?
You're making me think hard about my priorities.
And it's not just about the tangible things. It's also about our attitude,
Yeah.
how we show up in our work, our relationships, even just the mundane parts of life. Are we bringing our A game? Or are we just phoning it in?
Wow, okay, I'm starting to feel a little convicted here. This offering your best concept is hitting close to home. Let's move on to Leviticus 23. This is where we get to the feasts.
Yeah, the feast.
I gotta be honest. When I first read this section, I was a little confused. It seemed like a lot of rules about dates and rituals. What was the point of all that? Was it just about having a good time?
Well, the feasts were way more than just parties. They were holy gatherings, designated times for the whole community to come together and reconnect with God and with each other.
I like that.
Think of them like reminders,
Yeah.
carefully designed reminders of God's faithfulness, His provision, and his presence in their lives.
So it wasn't about the specific food. It was about the spiritual meaning behind it all.
Exactly. It was about being intentional,
Yeah.
about creating space to celebrate and to remember all that God had done for them.
That's a beautiful way to look at it.
Like Passover, for example. It was this powerful reminder of God's deliverance from slavery, a story passed down through generations to keep the memory alive of God's saving power.
Powerful stuff. So how do we, in 2024, create those kinds of feasts in our own lives? And I'm not talking about building altars or anything.
Right, of course. It's about being intentional,
Yeah.
about creating those pockets of reflection, gratitude, celebration in our everyday lives.
Give me an example.
It could be something as simple as taking a few minutes each day to appreciate the good things in your life,
Okay.
or maybe having a weekly ritual where you disconnect from the digital world and reconnect with yourself
Yeah.
or with loved ones.
I love that. It's like hitting the pause button
Yeah,
on all the craziness and remembering what really matters.
exactly.
And it doesn't have to be a solo thing, right? Like sharing those moments with others can make them even more powerful.
Yeah, definitely.
So we're taking these old practices and finding ways to make them work for us today.
It's about recognizing the wisdom in these ancient texts
Mm.
and then finding creative ways to apply them to our lives today.
Because even though the world has changed, our need for connection and meaning and purpose, it's still the same.
Exactly.
Now, speaking of connecting with something bigger than ourselves, I was reading about the Feast of Tabernacles, and it said that they would build these temporary shelters and live in them for a week. What was up with that?
It was this powerful physical act of remembering. Like imagine stepping out of your comfy home and into this temporary shelter, even just for a week.
Okay, yeah.
It was a way for them to really experience what their ancestors went through, wandering in the wilderness, relying on God's provision.
Wow.
As a tangible reminder of their dependence on God and a celebration of his faithfulness.
I never thought about it like that.
It wasn't just a story in a book. It was something they lived, a way to keep that memory alive and relevant.
That's incredible.
So even though we might not be building shelters in our backyards, I think there's a lesson there about the importance of remembering
Remembering what?
the stories, the traditions that have shaped our values, our beliefs. How can we bring those to life in our modern world?
That's a good question. This is also fascinating. It's like I was looking at these rituals the wrong way. Instead of just restrictive rules, they're actually guiding us toward a more filling and meaningful life.
You got it. That's the power of diving deep into these texts. They challenge us to examine our lives, our values, our priorities, and figure out how we can align ourselves with the things that lead to a good life.
The thing that's hitting me the hardest is this idea of intentionality, you know? It's so easy to just go through life on autopilot.
I know, right?
But Leviticus is really challenging me to be more thoughtful about my choices, my actions, even my thoughts.
That's fantastic. And you know what? That actually leads us perfectly into our next segment.
Oh, yeah. What are we talking about next?
We're going to talk about rest and remembering in a world that just keeps pushing us to do more.
I'm definitely feeling that push.
Specifically, we're going to dive into the idea of Sabbath.
Sounds good. But before we get to that, let's take a moment to just digest everything we've talked about so far. What stands out to you? What are you still thinking about? We'll be right back after a short break to give you some time to ponder these ideas.
All right, welcome back, everyone.
Back to Leviticus.
I hope you had a chance to think about everything we talked about in the first part. Before the break, we were discussing the feasts and how they were all about, making time to celebrate and remember.
Yeah, those feasts were powerful.
And there's one more we need to talk about, Sabbath.
Ah, yes, the Sabbath.
That whole day of rest thing.
It's a big one.
It sounds great in theory, but honestly, disconnecting for a whole day in this year, it feels like a recipe for anxiety.
Yeah.
Not rest.
I hear you. In our world, where everyone's always on the go, Sabbath feels almost impossible.
It does.
But I think that's exactly why it's so important.
How so?
It's like pushing back against the pressure to always be doing something.
I like that.
Saying yes to nourishing your soul.
So it's more than just sleeping in and binge watching shows?
Yeah.
Well, a little downtime is nice.
Of course.
But the Sabbath is about something deeper. It's about disconnecting from all the doing and reconnecting with something bigger than yourself.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's acknowledging that you're not in control and resting in the knowledge that,
Yeah.
you're taken care of, even when you're not working, striving.
This is reminding me of the Feast of Tabernacles. They both seem to be about stepping outside of our normal routines
That's a good connection.
and recognizing our reliance on something bigger than ourselves. With Tabernacles, it was like a physical thing, living in those temporary shelters.
Right.
But with Sabbath, it feels more spiritual.
Yeah, like a shift in perspective.
Recognizing that even with all our technology, we still need something beyond ourselves.
You got it.
So with the Feast of Tabernacles, they were physically experiencing that dependence on God.
During their time in the wilderness,
And the Sabbath is like the spiritual version of that.
a chance to let go of control and rest in something better.
I like that. But if I'm being honest, it feels a little daunting. How do you actually practice Sabbath in a way that feels real, meaningful?
That's the great thing about it. There's no right or wrong way.
Really?
It's about finding what works for you.
So what works for you?
For me, it's spending time in nature,
Mm.
disconnecting from all the screens, just being present in the moment.
I could see that working for me.
It's about creating a rhythm of rest that nourishes your soul,
Okay, so the focus is on the intention,
the intention behind it.
not necessarily the specific actions.
Exactly.
It's about making space to reconnect.
With yourself, with your loved ones,
Mm.
and with what you hold sacred,
I can definitely see how that could be restorative,
especially in our world today.
where everything's so fast-paced.
Yeah, we're constantly bombarded with information and demands.
It's like hitting the reset button.
Exactly.
You know, I thought Sabbath was just about taking a break, but now I'm seeing it's about so much more than that.
Tell me more.
It's about aligning ourselves with a bigger rhythm, a rhythm of rest and renewal.
I love that.
That allows us to show up more fully in life.
And the more we practice that rhythm, the more it affects everything we do.
Really?
We approach our work differently,
Hmm.
our relationships,
Okay.
even our challenges,
Wow.
with more peace and clarity.
It's like tapping into a deeper source of energy.
Yeah, like a hidden wellspring.
So we've covered a lot today. Holiness offerings, feasts, and now Sabbath rest. It's really amazing how all these principles from Leviticus are still so relevant today.
They really are.
What's been the most surprising thing for you?
You know, I think it's realizing that these ancient rituals and rules, they're not just outdated ideas. They're actually pointing us toward a more human way of living,
What do you mean?
a life rooted in connection, intentionality,
Mm.
and reverence for what sustains us.
I like that. It's like we've been looking at these texts the wrong way.
We have.
Instead of seeing them as restrictions, we're discovering that they're actually guiding us toward a more fulfilling life.
Exactly.
This has been such an insightful conversation.
It has.
I feel like I have a whole new understanding of Leviticus
That's great to hear.
and how I can apply these principles to my own life. Now, before we wrap up with some final thoughts, let's take another short pause to let everything sink in. What's standing out to you? What's resonating most deeply? We'll be right back after a moment of quiet contemplation. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a chance to really let all that sink in. It's pretty amazing how these old ideas from Leviticus can still be so relevant to us today.
I know, it's like they knew something back then.
Right, like we've been talking about priests and holiness and feasts, but they all offer some really practical wisdom for living a better life,
A more intentional life.
a more meaningful life.
Exactly.
So let's recap some of those key takeaways.
Sounds good.
One of the things that really stood out to me was this idea of living a set-apart life.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It's not about isolating ourselves from the world. It's more about being careful about what we let in,
Guarding our hearts and minds.
choosing our influences wisely, making sure our choices actually reflect our values.
Like we were saying before, it's like being a gardener. You have to be intentional about what you plant, what
Yeah.
you cultivate.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. We also talked about offering our best.
Oh, yeah, that's another important one.
And it's not just about material things. It's about how we show up in every area of our lives.
Our work, our relationships, even the little everyday things.
Exactly. Remember those ancient sacrifices? They were about giving the very best
The first fruits.
as a way of showing their devotion and reverence.
And even though we don't do that today,
I mean, I hope we don't.
right. But the principle still applies.
We should be bringing our best to everything we do,
Giving it our full attention.
showing up as our best selves.
It's about striving for excellence.
And then there were the feasts.
Those were fun to talk about.
I love how you explained that they were more than just parties.
They were celebrations, but with a purpose.
Yeah, they were designed to bring people closer to God.
and to each other,
It was about remembering God's faithfulness, His provision.
and experiencing that collective joy and gratitude,
It makes you think about how we can create those kinds of celebrations today.
doesn't it?
What would it look like to have feasts in our own lives
Feasts that nourish our souls.
that connect us to something bigger?
Maybe it's a daily gratitude practice.
A weekly ritual with family or friends?
Even an annual retreat to recharge and reconnect.
However it looks, it's about being intentional, carving out that sacred space.
For celebration and connection.
And of course, we can't forget about the Sabbath,
Ah, yes, the Sabbath.
that much-needed day of rest.
In a world that's constantly telling us to do more, be more, achieve more,
It's a powerful reminder that our worth isn't tied to our productivity.
it's about resting in something bigger than ourselves,
Letting go of that need for control.
aligning ourselves with a different rhythm.
You know, I used to think of Sabbath as just a day off.
But it's so much more than that,
It's about recognizing that we're human beings.
not human doings.
And sometimes the most productive thing we can do is to just stop, be still.
And reconnect with what truly sustains us.
Well, this has been an incredible conversation.
I've really enjoyed it.
I feel like I have a whole new perspective on Leviticus and how I can apply these ancient principles to my life today.
Me too.
I hope this deep dive has inspired you as well.
To maybe see these old texts in a new light
To go beyond the surface level.
and discover the timeless wisdom that's waiting there.
Because there's so much guidance and inspiration for anyone who's looking to live a more intentional life.
A more meaningful life, a more connected life.
So as you go about your day, your week, your year, we encourage you to ask yourself, how can I bring these principles into my own life?
How can I create my own feasts of celebration and remembrance?
How can I practice Sabbath in a way that truly nourishes my soul?
Because these ancient ideas, they still have something to teach us.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.